Children go missing, exploited, and trafficked every day, and it takes investigators, prosecutors, and private sector technology specialists to help them. Misinformation and TV portrayals can impact how resources are directed to help them. Today's guest is Kevin Metcalf. Kevin is a former federal agent turned prosecutor and founder of the National Child Protection Task Force, which brings together recognized experts in fields such as strategic legal applications, open source intelligence, cellular mapping and analysis, dark web investigations, and cryptocurrency to aid law enforcement agencies everywhere. He has undergone training provided by the National Computer Forensics Institute, the National White Collar Crime Center, and the FBI Cellular Analysis Survey Team, among others. Kevin developed a system for working with cell phone-related data in criminal cases that developed into a mobile device foundational course that focuses on the integration of legally derived information with open-source information. Kevin has also published a series of instructional books available on Amazon. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast today.
Thank you for having me on.
Can you share with the audience a little bit about your background and what led you to start the National Child Protection Task Force?
Yes, I have actually had this discussion a lot here lately, and came to the point where if you'd asked me probably 7 or 8 years ago what I'd be doing now, this was not on the radar. I started off way back in 1988 going through basic training in the Army. So since then, I've been in one uniform or another, and I've worked state and local law enforcement, and I've also worked in federal law enforcement, worked in counterterrorism. I think it was 2006, I'm losing track of time now, but I became a full-time single. I was the only parent. The girl's mom died many years ago, but I had the girls by myself since they were 2 and 5. At the time, I was in London, bombs were going off over there, and it was Thanksgiving night, and my overnight babysitter called and said, I can't be there tonight. So, being in London as a single only parent, and your kids are with overnight babysitters, and luckily we had some amazing neighbors that would always step up, and they took care of my girl. So that was it. I had to leave and do something else. So I came back and went to law school and became a prosecuting attorney. I've been doing that for about 10 years. So as an investigator, we're very much trained to look in data silos. You've got to know about DNA. You got to know about fingerprints. You got to know how all that kind of stuff works. Cell phones were sort of unknown at that point, pretty much. Cell site location information, social media, any kind of electronic evidence. That really wasn't being done much. So here I am, the new guy, after 20-something years of law enforcement at that point, I'm the new guy. So I looked for somewhere where I could just really make a difference. And that ended up being social media, cell phones, computers, and that kind of stuff. So I started working in that and looking for training. So I went through the FBI's CAST training, which is their cell site location guys, and those guys are phenomenal. Went to the Secret Service National Computer Training Center out east. I went there 3 times to learn a lot about forensics, social media, and things like that. So the real thing that clicked with me was, I'm working with cell phones, I'm working with social media, so that naturally led me into a lot of cases involving children and child predators. And I started putting these cases, I've had many, many jury trials that have involved social media and cell phones. So as a prosecutor, and you got to think about the difference between an investigator and a prosecutor. As a prosecutor, I've got 12 people from the community sitting there, varying levels of interest, varying levels of expertise and usage of technology. So I had to figure out, how do I explain how this cell site location information connects with this witness statement and connects with this forensic report off of this thing with Facebook, with Google, with you name it. After I did a few of those, it really clicked. It's like, why are we not doing this on the front end during investigations? All this stuff fits together. Yet law enforcement still treats everything as an individual silo. As a prosecutor, I've got to put it all together. So that investigative experience plus prosecutorial experience really led me to going back and helping on investigations. So as I did that a few years ago, I helped recover some teenage kids that were taken by online sexual predators. And in each case, there were federal agencies involved, all these other agencies involved, and within hours, usually, of me getting in and saying, you need to ask for this information, include this language on this search warrant, we were able to recover those kids within hours, or at least a day. That got me national attention. So at the National Cybercrime Conference, another great conference is just outside of Boston every year. Chris Kelly runs that through the Massachusetts AG's office, and he does a phenomenal job. They have experts from all over in cybercrimes. So I was speaking there on what I was doing, and I met Kevin Branzetti, and this thing started snowballing. We had more experts coming and saying, I like what you're doing. I want to be a part of it. So that was, I think, back in 2018 when this all started. So now we have a nonprofit that is made up of active duty law enforcement. We have active duty military. We have private sector technology professionals, engineers, and people like that. So all of us, come together, brainstorm. We look at problems. We ask questions with the technology people, and we'll say, we're seeing this. This is the data we're seeing. What can we do with that? What are we not asking for, and what do we not know? And I think that has been the big thing that has come together and has made a big difference.
Yeah, I kind of think of when I think of IT and programming and online and internet stuff and emerging technologies and kind of like public policy and politicians. There's a pretty big gap in emerging technology and where law enforcement and politics are and stuff like that. So it's neat to see someone really trying to bridge that gap to make sure that law enforcement is using some of the best technology available and being able to use it to catch people. So I want to take a little side trip here because you mentioned stuff about presenting stuff in front of presenting information in front of juries. And I've never had the opportunity to ask a prosecutor this, but I've heard of this thing called the CSI effect, where because of so many crime shows, juries now think that you should be able to very easily have all this perfect data, all this perfect information, results back in 3 minutes, and tie everything up nice and neatly in a bow. And do you find that as a problem prosecuting some of these cases?
Absolutely. And the way that I have really dealt with that is during jury selection. And you have to bring this up because the CSI effect, it is real. And people do expect you to be able to solve something in 30 minutes. So you definitely have to address that. And that has become a bigger and bigger issue in prosecutor or even attorney training. Defense, prosecution, doesn't matter. If you're going up in front of a jury, you better understand the CSI effect because it does impact what they expect. And you have to address those expectations early on. And I will say also that we're seeing a lot of information that's being put out. Now, human trafficking in this country, worldwide, it always has been, and it's going to continue to be a major problem. However, some of the statistics that we're seeing, they're not accurate. And a lot of I don't know that we actually have accurate stats, but the CSI effect, that also falls in when the public is given a lot of information. Let's say we say that human trafficking victims, they're going to have, and Joe Scaramucci does a great job of putting this out, but if we tell the public over and over again, human trafficking victims have bad teeth, they are malnourished, they have all this other stuff, and then I, as a prosecutor, bring a human trafficking case before them, and here's this victim that doesn't look, she doesn't have bad teeth, she doesn't look like she's unhealthy. There's a lot of misinformation that gets out. We really do need to address, and I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, the CSI effect is another one, especially when technology hits. It's a huge one.
So what are some of the misconceptions and the misinformation about trafficking stats? And what are some of those stats?
Well, Joseph has done a lot of work and trying to dig in on that, but it's something that's really, really difficult to do because well, again, as a prosecutor, and this is nationwide, most of the time when we get a human trafficking case, it's, if you think about things having a beginning, a middle, and an end, we're usually getting into those in the middle when this and not all human trafficking is sex. It's labor trafficking. There are all kinds of things. So we need to put that out. But when you get in the middle of it, trying to prove what is going on, and you've only got a very small snapshot, it's incredibly difficult. So most of the time, you don't get a human trafficking conviction. Usually that falls away because it's so much easier just to convict the guy on drugs, guns, money laundering, or something else. That's much easier, and it's not victim-centered. Trying to get some of these victims to cooperate and testify against their trafficker. I mean, there are so many psychological factors and so many evidentiary issues with that we really don't have good stats for reasons like that. So I don't really have anything prepared that I can send out to you, but just want to say that I do think that there are a lot of organizations, some of these nonprofits, that are abusing stats in order to get donations, and that's one thing that we got to be careful of on many levels.
Yeah, I can see that, and I mean, and part of it makes sense to me that as a prosecutor, I don't want to say you're going to go for the lowest hanging fruit in terms of what you're going to convict the person on, but I suppose it's, if I can get this person in jail, it's better than them being in jail for a more serious, if it's if I have a higher chance of getting them in jail for this or a lower chance of getting them in jail for that, the important thing is getting them off the street, I suppose.
Absolutely. And we're just overrun with cases, and there's just so much that, if we can hit somebody hard with, especially on the federal side, if we can get somebody in on gun and drug charges, they can hit pretty hard and get them put away pretty well with that. So a lot of times we'll take that because we got 10 more sitting here waiting that we have to dig into. And that's just the reality of what we're dealing with.
And is some of it also kind of lowering the stress on the victims if they don't have to testify about the abuse that they've gone through? You're I hear that talked around, but I don't know if that's the case. That if the victim doesn't have to testify, we can still get the person in jail. It saves re-traumatizing the victim.
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, I can't tell you how many times we've tracked down, we are the National Child Protection Task Force, but we work with any vulnerable population. And that's something we all, I think if you were able to go around and talk to all of our volunteers, you would find that everybody's got a passion for the vulnerable. So it's not just kids. And I can't tell you how many times we've found, let's say, a 17-year-old, and they say, "Stop looking for us. I don't want to go back." These people may be making money off of me, but at least they care about me. So that when I said psychological factors, there are a lot. And it's not only that, a lot of the news focuses, and I'm in law enforcement, and I enjoy when they say, "Hey, look at all these kids you recovered." That's what we do. But you never see the news. The media doesn't go back and say, "What happened to these kids? Let's go back and check them out 6 weeks later. Where are they?" These human trafficking victims. Where are they 6 weeks after this recovery happens? Well, law enforcement doesn't do aftercare. They don't do that recovery. And that's why you see all these nonprofits, and some of them are really wonderful, that have popped up and take care of people. But a victim, when I need somebody to come and show up in court, and you're looking at a year later, they're very likely back out in that trafficking. And it's all, unfortunately, a lot of times it's by choice. It's how they pay the bills. And not only that, these traffickers a lot of times will get them addicted to drugs. So that drug addiction is a method of control over them, and not the only one. But yeah, it is sad. It's terribly sad.
Is a predominant amount of what you've dealt with is domestic trafficking or international trafficking?
Well, the trafficking, I mean, primarily U.S. based, but we don't really stick to one thing. So we work on let's just stick with children for the moment. So we work with missing, exploited, and trafficked. Now, there's a lot of overlap. So just to simplify things, child exploitation, for that, I'm generally talking about child rape videos that are sold on the dark web and often referred to as child pornography. Actually, it's referred to as child pornography in the legal definition in the statutes, which we're working to try to get that changed. But so exploitation, you could, and this could go on forever, Chris. So a child can be at home every night. A child can be at school every day. They can be exploited out of their own home. I can't tell you how many we've worked where the parents are the ones raping the children or setting up the rape of that child, getting it on video, taking pictures of it, and then they'll share it or trade it on the dark web. So that's the exploitation side of it. And it can be mixed with trafficking. So for trafficking, what I'm usually referring to are people who will go set up ads. So they're out here, probably familiar with Backpage before it was shut down. So they'll post sex ads online, and they'll set up encounters where people will pay for sex, and they'll meet for sex, physically meet. You also have parents who don't advertise, but it's more word of mouth. So Barbara Jean Wilson, one of our advisors, survivor advisors, was trafficked by her own mom from the ages of 8 to 13. And this was back before the internet. So, that still happens. And then, we have the missing kids. So we try to get in really fast on these cases with missing kids before, they're taken into the exploitation or the trafficking, which they're at higher risk. I'm not saying that every missing kid goes into that, but they're at much higher risk of being vulnerable for that.
So before we started recording, we talked a little bit about some of the definitions and the way these things are talked about. And you talked about, the nomenclature of missing versus runaway and how that impacts what happens and how that's, can be used against them.
Right. If you just do and whoever's listening, just do a search in your area. What are the guidelines that your local police department uses for runaway versus missing? And I think you'll find that nationwide, if a child is reported as missing, it's not considered a crime. No investigation will generally take place. And it's pretty much put on the parents to find that child. They're going to be put into NCIC. So if an officer somewhere happens to run that kid's name, it'll pop up that this kid's a runaway, and they will, take custody of them and get them returned. Predators are extremely aware of this. And we see this over and over again of the grooming process. And I'm sure you've seen things in the media about grooming. Well, these predators, or quite often recruiters, so these traffickers and these child predators will have other people. They will pay in drugs, or they will pay money, or they pay a finder's fee. It could be somebody that your child goes to school with that is paid to just go find vulnerable people that you can use in this business. The missing part, predators understand this very well. Predators are very creative. I don't like it when we say, look at these idiots out here. They're not idiots. They watch everything we do. They watch the news to learn lessons. So they are well aware that being a runaway is a whole different level than being a missing child. I mean, think about it for yourself and your listeners. What do you think of when you hear the term missing child or abducted child? Now, what do you think about when you hear runaway? Law enforcement's the same way. And what they'll say is, they'll come back when they're ready. They ran away. So they'll take a report, stick them in NCIC, and that's kind of it. Now, predators, during the grooming process, they will start building this rapport. They'll start building this trust, this illusion of trust. And during that time, they'll start the isolation process. Don't tell your parents about me. They won't understand. Don't tell your friends about me. They won't understand. And they start to isolate them. And then when they're ready, they'll say, make sure that everybody knows you're running away. We don't want the police, making a big deal about this, and this is your decision. So make sure your parents know you're running away. Make sure law enforcement knows you're running away. When that happens, well, the responsibility is placed on the parents to find that child. Law enforcement does what they can do, But I've had countless agencies say it's not a crime. We can't do anything. We can't go to Google or Facebook or Instagram or anywhere else and say, give me your data, because a crime has not been committed. So you see the problem we're having. And not only that, but there are other things. Let's say we have, and I don't want to call anybody out. Let's say we have social media or a cell phone company. There is something that we can do under 18 USC 2702, which allows us in an emergency to go to these electronic service providers and say, I need this data. I've got an emergency. Well, right now, the general thought is that, let's say for the first 48 hours, we can do that. But after that, they're going to say, well, it's not an emergency anymore. You need to get a warrant. So let's say we got an 11-year-old out that's missing from home. It's only an emergency for 48 hours. After that, we got to shift back to the search warrant process, which could take weeks. We have so many of these small issues that need to be addressed and need to be addressed on a national level. But yeah, the missing versus runaway, and I haven't even touched on foster care yet. And I do want to point out, I am not saying foster parents are responsible for all this. But there are foster parents that are doing bad things, just like there are natural parents doing bad things. But as Kevin Branzetti has always said, if you go to any major agency and you say, how many car thefts have you got here? How many robberies happened last month? How many burglaries happened? They're going to be able to tell you numbers. You say, how many kids have you got that are runaways in your jurisdiction? Or how many are missing? They don't have a clue. You can probably go to each state and say, how many kids that are in foster care aren't where they're supposed to be? That's another number that you just can't get. I don't think, as far as I can tell, and we've been asking, those numbers don't exist. That's why I said stats. There's so many problems with statistics that sometimes we don't even know what questions to ask.
Yeah, that's the scary thing, is that people are missing and no one knows who's missing, or there's no tracking of at some level of who's missing.
Yeah, and you have there are so many good parents out here. But if you're a good person and a good parent, you're kind of living in a bubble. You're not really aware that kids are missing out of foster care and being, they're at a higher risk. You're not aware that these runaways, you're not aware of what's happening because you're not buying sex. You're not on the dark web looking for these videos. Most of the good people out here are just really unaware of what's going on.
Yeah, that's the scary aspect to me. So what are some of the things that put children at risk of, we can even exploitation, trafficking, and we'll call it kidnapping in terms of missing rather than missing, because I don't know that that's the right term for that at the moment.
Well, yeah, kidnappings do happen, but let's say you're a criminal. Would you want to go out here and snatch some kid when all you got to do is talk to him for a few weeks and convince them to run away?
Yeah.
Go with you?
That's coerced missing?
Yes. So we prefer missing or not. You've got two choices when it comes to a child. If the child is in the care of a parent or guardian, they're not missing. But if they're not there, they're missing. They're not runaways. They're not any of these other labels. We definitely need law enforcement checking into that. But there's a lot of stuff that we need to do to fix that. And Chris, what was your question on that again?
What are some of the things that put children at risk for each of those categories?
And I constantly am asked what apps to avoid. Pretty much anything that touches the internet, including school and library. I think that not having a connection with a parent or a guardian or some adult that you can trust, if you don't have a connection where you can come to that adult and say, this person I'm talking to online is making me uncomfortable. Most of what we see are the parents try to control everything, try to control all the apps, all the accounts that are on a device. And I'm not saying that shouldn't happen, but when that child gets to 14, 15, 16, and 17, and you're still doing that, there's probably a burner device. They probably got a secondary phone with their accounts on it, and that's where all the danger comes from, because they no longer have that connection with that parent. They no longer have a safe place where they can go to an adult and say, something's going on here, because most of the time, if they do that, there's a knee-jerk reaction of that parent, understandably, of I'm going to protect my child, so I'm taking their phone away from them. And that child, that is their life, especially after COVID. That's where their social connections are. That's where their friends are. So if they can't come to a parent and tell that parent, talk to that parent about sex, that's very difficult for a lot of parents. I grew up, there was no talk. It was just don't do it.
Yeah.
That was the rule. You don't have sex. That was the only talk we had. And I still see a lot of parents doing that of, I don't talk to my kids about sex. They know they're not supposed to do it until they're married. Okay, how's that going to work? Not very well. So I put this more on the parents of saying, if you really want to protect your kids, you've got to develop a relationship. You got to put that device down, and you've got to look at what is one thing I can do today that can improve the relationship with my child. And that's going to be different. And I've got, if you've got more than one child, the parent-child relationship with each of those children is very likely very different. So listening to each child on an individual level and loving that kid for who they are, not for who you want them to be, and accept them if they want to be a, I don't know, philosophy major instead of going to medical school, or maybe they don't want to go to college at all. Maybe they want to go into welding or something. You have to be okay with that and to accept them for who they are and for their own interests, and not try to control everything they do, because that's, again, an illusion of safety and security that doesn't really exist. And I really don't see that. I really don't think that you're going to be able to protect kids that way. I think it's going to be the relationship that protects them.
Yeah, I think about, like, I've thought the same way, for all the tech that there is out there, all the neat things that we can do with it, like trying to protect someone, you're 100% protected by this technology. It's just not going to happen. If you're going to try to keep your kids off, I don't want my kids to ever go online. Well, they're going to find a way around that, And to me, like when you talked about, building the relation, like the answer is not more tech, more controls. It's about the relationship that the parents have with the kid. And I like that, what can I do today to connect and to grow my relationship with my kid? And that being kind of the foundation of giving them the space to talk about what's going on in their life and talk about the difficulties they're having.
Yeah, because what we see over and over again are, during the grooming process, they're looking for that natural break that happens between parent and child as they grow older. There's that natural separation where that child is saying, "Hey, I'm becoming an adult and an individual. I want to start, figuring out who I am and what I am." Now, if you add in eating disorders, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, or anything like that's a whole nother level of vulnerability, and they zero in on that and they take full advantage of it, and they build that trust. Whereas the parent, if your child has an eating disorder or depression or something like that, you're probably increasing, your care naturally, and you're trying to make that kid eat, and you're really not listening because you're in a panic mode. Well, that creates even more of a gap, and those predators know that, and they will slide into that.
Work to build trust, not to build better tech.
Yeah, and there's a lot of social engineering that goes on in this. That I can't remember who was asked. We had our conference last week. So Chris Hadnaggy, a great guy, founder of the ILF, Innocent Lives Foundation, also a social engineer. He was talking about this process, and I think somebody asked him or one of our speakers, well, if these people online are complimenting my daughter on something she's done, I compliment her all the time. Why is that not? Why doesn't that work? Well, it's the weight. As I think it was Chris was saying, that it's the weight that we give. That child is going to think, well, you're my parent. You're supposed to say that. This other person, I don't know them, but they just complimented me. So that builds this oxytocin and this illusion of trust and this connection. And that's exactly what happens. And that's exactly why parents need to work harder at developing that relationship and that connection and that trust.
Yeah, that sounds so important. So let's take a little shift here. So when it comes to recovery of missing and exploited children, I imagine that you run across and kind of have to deal with a little bit of what I do. So on my day job, I run the website called whatismyipaddress.com, where it provides a lot of potentially specific information about the way you connect to the internet and potentially where you are. And there's a general response of like, oh gosh, you're exposing private information about me. But I also talk about privacy services. So there's this delicate balance between privacy and kind of knowing what data about you is out there. How do you kind of deal with that in trying to recover missing kids? Because I can assume like there's so much pressure on law enforcement to, particularly now, you can access this, but you can't access that. This is private, but that's not private. You need a court order for that or exigent circumstances for this. Like I can see all these things kind of pushing and pulling on the ability to investigate and the ability to help get kids back home.
Yes, that has been huge. So first I want to say the National Child Protection Task Force, we are made up of active duty law enforcement and military and other people. So we have to follow rules. I'm a prosecutor. I want everything we do to be prosecutable at the end of that. Privacy is a huge thing. We only work with law enforcement. So there has to be an agency with jurisdiction over the investigation. The reason for that is that we don't know if a child is running from parents who are exploiting them or trafficking them. We have run into that more than once. So it's not like a parent can just come to us and say, my kid's missing, can you find them for me? That's not how this works. So we have to follow the rules of the jurisdiction that we're working with. And some of them have more restrictive, some of them are more open. So I want to put that out there first of all. But we do use extremely sensitive and extremely controversial tools. And so I've mentioned Kevin Branzetti a few times. He's retired from NYPD, head of their cyber intel. His whole world is counterterrorism. And his 3 golden rules he's come up with are the number one for us, it's got to have a valid law enforcement purpose. Now, I realize that can be a lot of things, but if some agency comes to us saying, hey, we got this immigration group down here, it was like, that's not what we do. We don't do immigration. We don't do anything like that. So for us, a valid purpose is that there is a vulnerable person that is at risk, that is being exploited or being harmed or in danger. That's generally what we go by. Second rule, we have to use the least invasive means necessary. And then the third is we always protect civil liberties, civil rights, and privacy rights. We always do that to the maximum of our abilities. Now, you've got to consider this year alone, we have exceeded 1,000 assists to law enforcement. So the repetition that we get on this over and over and over again is very, very high. We have, I think, the best way of doing these investigations and doing them to protect as much privacy as we can while zeroing in on the right people. Because, I mean, you're in technology. You know how easy it can be to go down a rabbit hole, and it's not the right person. That's a lot of resources and a lot of time wasted, and we can't do that. So for facial recognition, for example, I know there's a lot of controversy over, well, this targets minorities and gives false positives. Well, that's got to be trained through artificial intelligence, the algorithm has got to be trained. But there should never be a time when I say I run a face through. I don't care what color they are, what race they are. I run a face through, I get a hit. I'm thinking that looks like the guy. That's not enough. That's never enough. That investigator, and if we work with them, there's got to be that understanding. You do not arrest this person based on an algorithm. You have to follow up. You've got to look for tattoos. You got to look for environmental features. You got to look for something else that also will point to this person, because we have agencies, and that's what makes the news. When an agency screws up, it's not technology that screws up. It's the investigative failures to follow proper investigative procedure. As a prosecutor, I understand eyewitness testimony is incredibly unreliable. So even if I have a person that's pointing during a lineup saying, that's the guy right there, I want more. That's not enough. And neither is running this facial recognition program and it's saying, hey, this is the guy. Facial recognition, all it's doing is taking, let's say it's taking your face and it's saying what looks like Chris in all my data. And it's going to say, these guys look like Chris. These are the closest matches I have. None of them may be you. So you have to understand the limitations of technology. If you don't, you're going to misuse it. You're going to screw up an investigation. You're going to arrest the wrong people. And that's going to happen.
So I want to interrupt and ask. So, and I don't know if you can answer the question or not. Do you find that there is a, so we say that, eyewitness testimony, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's call it a 5. You can assign your own number. On a scale of 1 to something, I'll call it a 5. Is there this general perception within the law enforcement community that facial recognition algorithm would be a 7 or an 8, or should it be treated as a 5 also?
For me, I don't generally look at it that way. So we work closely with the super recognizers out of the UK, Greenwich University. Work very closely with Kelly, who is probably the top super recognizer, at least on the civilian side. She works anti-terrorism and different things. So we work with kids a lot. So let's say you get a child rape video and you get screenshots. Just the nature of these videos, you're going to get a face of a child. And sometimes, if we're lucky, the face of a predator, of the child rapist. We run those through. When you're running kids, you get a lot of hits. I could run a child through. So the algorithm itself, I look at as triage. It's a way of triaging all the stuff that we can get on the internet that's been released into the wild. People taking selfies and throwing them out there. I really don't think they have that much of an interest in privacy if you're sending your images out into the wild of the internet. So anyway, first step, we triage that and we get all these kids. And a lot of times it's 200 or 300. So I'll get Kelly on. I said, Kelly, can you look through these? I got 200 kids that I don't know. I'm not a super recognizer. So that's one thing I want to point out. There's a genetic component to this. I can look through those and my fatigue level is substantial, and then I end up, I think that's where a lot of privacy concerns are. If I have to start diving into this person's social media to get more of an idea. Kelly, a few weeks ago, took 700 images, just went down, selected to fewer than 10. That went to an investigator, and we identified a predator and 2 child victims that were prepubescent, I'll say, out of that process. So I think eyewitness now, after working with Kelly, so we had one guy, we're testing this facial recognition out. We ran him and he said, hey, where did I take that picture? Where was that? Turns out it wasn't him. He didn't even recognize his own face. It did look a lot like him. But, when you have people like Kelly, and there's a genetic component to this, and then you have people on the other end of the scale that really can't recognize faces. There's a medical condition. We don't test the public. So I don't know whether this person is a super recognizer or whether they're at the low end of the spectrum. Plus, they've probably just been through an incredibly stressful event. They know exactly what that gun looks like. They know exactly what that knife looks like. And they think they know what that guy's face looks like. But, there's so many things that, we can't blame the victim of that for a faulty identification any more than we can blame that technology for the faulty for getting really close. What we can do is say, the investigator, you better be able to follow procedure, put safeguards in place, and make sure that you have something else that identifies that person before they take action.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes perfect sense. And I don't even remember where we got into this.
Oh yeah, I don't. There are so many things that we can get into here.
Oh, we were talking about kind of that push and pull between privacy and your access to the data and being able to make decisions. Do you find that, is legislation kind of behind the curve? Is public opinion in front of the curve? And obviously you have a perspective of being in law enforcement, so there's that position from it.
There is, yes. So in law enforcement, our politicians are, and I've got to say that if you got me 5 years ago and compared to right now, it's about repetition and exposure. So, just kind of backtrack, and I'm probably going to forget what we're talking about, but Abraham Lincoln had this quote of, give me 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend 6 hours sharpening my axe. When I set up this nonprofit, we decided our investigators would take on terrorism, property crimes, homicides, drug cases, anything where technology touches, because we want to get really, really, really good. So that constant exposure to different methods, different facts, and not only that, we work internationally now. So we're exposed to other countries and their investigators and how they do things. So we take all of that into our own way of doing things. And as Bruce Lee said, when you first start off, a punch is just a punch, a kick is just a kick, and then after you've done it a little bit, it's no longer that. It's something more. It's something different. But then 10,000, 20,000 repetitions later, punch is just a punch, kick is just a kick. So now for us, it doesn't matter what kind of investigation or where it is in the world. I can see the intricate details. Now, you go to a politician and try to explain what I can see and the nuances I see. There's a lot. It's like you're a technology guy. You try to explain what you do to the average politician and get them to understand at a level where they can write policy and guide policy. It's so incredibly difficult to do. And we're seeing that right now. Senator Wyden, for example, has dropped a bill. The Fourth Amendment is not for sale. What they're going to do effectively is to limit law enforcement's ability to use technology at all. They're going to take all that away. And I don't think the public is aware of how much that's going to hit our ability to work on what criminals do. Because criminals, as you know, are using all this data. They're hunting our kids. They're hunting our elderly. How many adults do you see that are scammed? It's all the time, right? So if you tell law enforcement that, well, you can no longer hunt in technology, you can't use facial recognition, you can't use all this other stuff because people have done bad things with it. Well, that's kind of like going in and saying, well, law enforcement, this officer over here shot this guy and it wasn't justified, so we're taking everybody's guns away. You can't have them anymore. Or this this officer had a pursuit and accidentally killed this innocent couple, so we're taking away your ability to drive cars. They're wanting us to hunt predators in the technology space, but they want to take away the tools because of some misuse. So that is coming, and it's going to hit hard if it does, because we use a lot of sensitive tools to find kids, to bring them to safety, and to bring predators to justice. So there are a lot of things that it's really difficult to make a politician or anybody else aware of the reality of it unless we can bring them in and say, this is what's going on. Here's how this really works. And another complaint I get, especially from federal agencies, is that the media, the reporters, they don't really get to talk to the guys on the ground level that are actually doing the work and doing the reps and seeing everything. They talk to the public information officers. And again, not saying anything bad about public information officers, but they haven't done this and they don't know the nuanced, all of the stuff, how it really works and how it plays out. So they're doing the best they can, but what they tell the media is really not the big picture. So we have all this misinformation that's flying around, and the politicians are trying to make laws based on what they think they.
Yeah, and you still do, like, to me, it's the. I don't want either extreme. I want there to be a nice balance. I want there to be this constant tension between privacy and access. That, there are situations where privacy potentially should be violated for a bigger cause. In other cases, well, maybe privacy is more important than this one specific issue. And it's always going to be that tension of push and pull. And that's what I want to see. I like it when there's a little bit of tension between these things, because then hopefully we find a balance.
There's got to be a balance. Like, going through law school, of course, they hit on first year. You don't really have any absolute rights, minus maybe what absolute rights do you have? Freedom of speech? Can you shout fire in a crowded theater? Well, there's always that balance. You've got to find the balance. Yet we are creating this cult of privacy here that people think everything they do has got to have absolute privacy. Yet, as you know, being in technology, what are we exposing through our cell phones, through things like this? What are we exposing every day? And people take selfies and take pictures and post pictures, and all this stuff is out there. Yet they say you can't use that. It's my privacy. So yeah, there's got to be a balance. And I wish somebody would put a poll out, Wall Street Journal or somebody, just put a poll out and say, would you allow us to look through your stuff if we thought you had something to do or it could lead to the rescue of a child or the arrest of a child rapist? Would you allow that? I think most people would say, yeah, I'm okay with that. Or or something along those lines. But I think most people are okay with saying, yeah, I'll give up a little of my privacy if we can arrest a child rapist or save a child.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree. And on the flip side, when you have people working in law enforcement who take advantage of those systems for their own personal gain, that needs to be dealt with appropriately as well.
That absolutely does. Yes. If somebody violates something, but that comes back to the way what we do. We have checks and balances. So if we use a tool, we have somebody else that's not using that tool. They'll come in and spot check. Nothing can be deleted. So you come in and spot check, and everything better be matching up, and you better have a record of it. So there are a lot of things that we could do. You got to limit what goes in and what comes out. So you got to limit what cases. Personally, I don't think a lot of the technology investigations should be used on, let's say, shoplifting or somebody got their car keyed out in the parking lot. I don't care who they are. I don't think you should be writing a reverse location search warrant to Google or anybody else for stuff like that. I think this stuff should be saved for the important stuff.
Yeah, a car was keyed in this parking lot. We want all the location data of every phone that was in this parking lot at the same time.
Yeah, that's what gives us a bad name. Or the EFF, I can't remember her name right off the bat, but I was in a discussion, this forum, where they said, well, this lady was attacked on this trail, kind of out in a park, and they ran a geofence search warrant, came up with this guy, and that led to him being exposed as an attacker, or something happened there that he got exposed. It wasn't him. And I said, well, let's go back 20 years ago. And let's say his neighbor said, hey, I saw Fred going up there, to the trail. And I think that might have been him. The investigator screws it up and exposes, Fred as being the attacker. It wasn't him. And the point being, it's not the technology's fault. It's the investigator that doesn't follow up, that doesn't have safeguards in place, and that doesn't understand the limitations of technology as it fits into that scenario.
Yeah, and what gets made public in the process of sorting through it all.
Yes. Yeah. You've got to have the investigations. It's a lot of it is just old school investigations, but you apply technology to it. But people don't. They trust technology too much. They trust that facial recognition, that's AI. I've heard that word. I've heard that term out here. So it told me that that's the guy. So it must be that guy. They don't understand the limitations. They don't understand how the technology works, how it got to this point, and what they need to do to ensure that the investigation is properly done.
And so as we wrap up here, I'm thinking of there is a product service app, whatever you call it, that I was thinking of called Trafficking, that they're asking people when you're traveling to take a photo of your hotel room and upload it to this platform. That way it provides organizations like yours more data points. Have you found, whether it's that product specifically or other products like that, has that aided in recovery?
Anything dealing with images are very important. And again, you being in technology, you understand this, but on the dark web, predators are sharing data. They have manuals. They have a collective. So every time, like our podcast, or maybe somebody watching that's their job, they go through and they say, I learned this. So I'm going to go to the manual and I'm going to update the manual. This is how they outsmart us, and that's how they stay ahead of us. So we have to be very careful not to educate the bad guys, but sometimes an image especially when you're dealing with child rape videos. And again, this is not child pornography. I want to point that out. Child sexual abuse material is the general term, but I always point out these are child rape videos. Sometimes those videos will have something in the background. If it's in a hotel room, if you're in a hotel room, you take a picture and we've got that by date and time. Sometimes there's a picture, there's a bedspread, there's carpeting, there's something in there that will help us identify the location where this happened and the time frame where this happened. So yeah, anything like that is very important. I've also been playing around with Jumbo Privacy. That's an app I've been looking at. It's a paid app, but as I'm sure you're aware of, if the app is free, you're the product, right?
Yeah.
So this is a paid app, but they go back in and they scrub social media. They look at your settings. They give you recommendations, and I really liked that one. That's another one that I've been recommending.
And that's a nice balance of helping out and also protecting yourself and your family from people being able to learn about you.
Yeah, and people ask me, they say, why do you push privacy if you're hunting these people? But you got to consider how many victims there are. I'm a prosecutor. I don't just care about, I care about children, but I don't just care about children. I care about everybody. I care about my family. I care about yours. And I see so many people coming in and say, I've been victimized. And, these guys are stalking me. And I'll go and I'll say, well, all right, is this your email? And they'll say, yeah. And then I'll come back a minute. I said, is this your password? And I'll say, is this your login to iTunes or, your other accounts? And I say, yeah, how'd you know that? It's like, probably the same way that this stalker has got into your stuff. It's a password hygiene, but we need to protect everybody, and you got to find that balance. Yeah, the criminals are going to get good. Apple's going to, improve their encryption on something. We're not going to be able to get content, but we'll find a way to hunt those guys regardless of what happens in technology, because that's what we do, and we're going to keep going no matter what changes.
Yep. A crime is happening and people are involved. There's more than technology involved.
Yes. Yeah. There's always some trail to follow. We just got to find it.
Yep. I think that is the perfect way to finish up. There's always a trail. There's always a sign that we got to follow. If people want to learn more about you or the National Child Protection Task Force, where can they find both of those online?
At our website, www.ncptf, National Child Protection Task Force.org.
And we'll make sure to link that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for coming on today, Kevin.
Thank you, Chris. I think what you're doing is very important, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Prey podcast. If you found something memorable or actionable about this episode, please leave a comment as a review by visiting easyprey.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Kevin Metcalf can be found at easyprey.com/75.